Power Automate provides flexibility in how flows execute by allowing different users to trigger a flow while defining whether the actions inside the flow should run under their credentials or a fixed account. This is particularly relevant when dealing with run-only users, which lets non-owners execute a flow without modifying it. However, understanding how this setting affects both data creation, SharePoint, and email sending, Outlook, is crucial to ensure that flows behave as expected. In this deep dive, we will analyze how run-only users work in Power Automate, particularly focusing on two main actions within a flow: Create Item, SharePoint, and Send Email, Outlook. Through detailed testing, we will explore how execution changes when using user-provided connections versus fixed connections. The results will show how SharePoint records are created under different user accounts and how email messages are sent from different senders depending on the connection type. To track execution behavior, we are using a SharePoint list called Flow Execution Log. This list allows us to monitor who triggered the flow and under which identity the actions were executed. The key fields in this list include Title, a generic field to store the flow name or any relevant information. Triggered by. This field captures the name of the user who started the flow. This is always the actual person who manually triggers the execution. Created by. This field is automatically set by SharePoint to reflect the identity of the user who created the item. Depending on the connection settings, this could be the actual triggering user or a predefined fixed account. Additionally, the Send Email action in our flow generates an email notification after an item is created. We will analyze whether the email is sent from the triggering user or from a fixed account, depending on the run-only user settings. The flow consists of two core actions that we will analyze in detail. Create Item, SharePoint. This action logs an entry in the flow execution log list, capturing the triggering user and the actual creator of the item. The created by value will depend on whether the flow is running under the initiator's credentials or a fixed account. Send Email, Outlook. After the item is created, the flow sends an email with execution details. The sender of the email depends on the connection settings. If the flow runs under the initiator's credentials, the email will be sent from their mailbox. If a fixed connection is used, the email will be sent from the predefined account, e.g., admin. To change the execution identity, we need to configure the run-only user settings. In the Edit mode, under the Run-Only User section, we click Manage Run-Only Permissions, which opens the configuration panel. Here we find a section called Connections Used, listing all the connectors used in the flow, including SharePoint and Outlook. Each connector has a drop-down with two options. Provided by Run-Only User. The flow executes using the credentials of the user who triggered it. Use this connection, Admin's connection. The flow always executes using admin's credentials, regardless of who starts it. Initially, we will set both SharePoint and Outlook to Provided by Run-Only User to observe how actions execute under the initiating user's identity. Later, we will change these settings to a fixed admin connection and analyze the difference. In the first test, we set both the SharePoint and Outlook connections in the flow to Provided by Run-Only User. This means that when the flow runs, it will execute all actions using the credentials of the user who triggered the flow. Essentially, the flow will perform operations as if the user who initiated it was the one executing all tasks, including creating SharePoint items and sending emails. To test this, AliUgo is the one who triggers the flow. Since the flow is configured to use the initiating user's credentials, all actions, including the creation of the SharePoint item and sending the email, will be executed under AliUgo's identity. This has an immediate impact on how the flow behaves. When the flow performs the Create Item action in SharePoint, the Triggered By field in the SharePoint list is automatically populated with AliUgo's name, since he's the one who started the flow. Similarly, the Created By field, which reflects who created the item, will also display Alugo's name. In other words, the record in SharePoint will show that Alugo triggered the flow and created the item. The second part of the flow involves sending an email via Outlook. Because the flow is running under Alugo's credentials, the email will be sent from Alugo's Outlook account. The email will also contain details about the flow's execution, such as the name of the flow and the user who triggered it. The email's body will reflect that Alugo was both the trigger and the creator of the SharePoint item. After the flow runs, we go to the SharePoint list to verify the results. We'll see that Triggered By is set to Alugo's name, indicating he was the one who triggered the flow. Created By is also set to Alugo's name, reflecting that the SharePoint item was created by him. Then we check the email sent out by the flow. Upon reviewing the email, we observe that the email is indeed sent from Alugo's Outlook account, not from any other user or service account. The email body correctly indicates that the flow was triggered by Alugo, and the SharePoint item was created by him, ensuring that all the actions are properly attributed to the initiating user. Through this test, we confirm that when Run-Only User is enabled, the flow operates entirely under the user's credentials. Every action, whether it's creating a record in SharePoint or sending an email, is executed in the context of the triggering user, ensuring that the flow behaves as if the user themselves were performing all tasks. This also ensures that both the SharePoint list and email notifications are tied directly to the identity of the user who triggered the flow, providing clear accountability and traceability. In the second test, we change the settings to use fixed connections rather than relying on the Run-Only User option. To do this, we return to the Manage Run-Only Permissions section of the flow and adjust the settings for both the SharePoint and Outlook connectors. Instead of allowing the flow to run under the identity of the user who triggers it, we select the option Use this connection, admin, for both connectors. This means that both the SharePoint and Outlook actions will execute using the credentials of admin rather than the triggering user. Now, Alugo triggers the flow again, just as before. However, since we've changed the connection settings to use admin's fixed credentials, we can expect a few key differences in how the flow behaves. 1. SharePoint item. Creation. When the flow creates a new item in SharePoint, Triggered By will still show Alugo's name because he is the one who triggered the flow. However, the Created By field will now reflect admin's name. This happens because, despite Alugo being the one who started the flow, the actual creation of the SharePoint item is being carried out under admin's credentials, due to the fixed connection we configured. This behavior shows that, while the trigger event is still attributed to the user who initiated the flow, Alugo, the execution of the SharePoint action is performed under the admin account, not Alugo's. 2. Email notification. Next, the flow proceeds to send an email via the Outlook connector. Since we've set the Outlook connection to use admin's credentials, the email will now be sent from admin's Outlook account, rather than Alugo's. This means that even though Alugo triggered the flow, the actual action of sending the email is performed under admin's identity. The email body will also reflect this change. It will state that admin is the one who created the SharePoint item, even though Alugo was the one who triggered the flow. The key point here is that the Created By information in the email matches the fixed connection, admin's account, not the triggering user. This test demonstrates the behavior when using a fixed connection in Power Automate. While the triggered user, Alugo, is still logged as the one initiating the flow, the actions themselves, whether creating a SharePoint item or sending an email, are carried out under a predefined account, admin in this case. This approach ensures that automation can consistently execute under a specific user account, which can be particularly useful when dealing with operations that require elevated permissions or need to be run under a consistent identity, regardless of who triggers the flow. In conclusion, using a fixed connection guarantees that automation runs under a designated user, and this is important in scenarios where certain operations need to be executed with higher privileges or when you want to ensure that automation actions are tied to a specific account. It's an essential best practice to set up these fixed connections when you need to have precise control over which account executes the flow's actions. From these tests, we can see that run-only user settings affect every connector used in a flow, not just SharePoint. If a flow includes multiple actions across different services, each connection behaves according to its specific setting. Using run-only user, provided by the triggering user, ensures that actions are performed under the user's identity, which is useful for preserving accountability. Every action is logged under the actual person performing it. Respecting user permissions. The flow runs with the same rights as the user, avoiding unintended access issues. On the other hand, using a fixed connection is beneficial for automating tasks that require elevated permissions, ensuring that sensitive actions, e.g., writing to restricted SharePoint lists, are always executed under an admin account. Standardizing email notifications. Sending emails from a consistent sender rather than different users each time. A best practice is to combine both approaches strategically. For example, allow users to trigger flows while ensuring that critical actions, such as updating secure databases or emailing clients, always execute under a controlled fixed account. By understanding and configuring run-only user permissions properly, we can build Power Automate flows that are secure, predictable, and aligned with business needs.